Welcome back everybody, this is Awais back with another video on the channel. This is going to be the sixth part of the series that I'm working on, in which I'm creating a mobile application using IONIC framework from scratch to end. Now we've covered 5 parts. Here's a playlist for all the videos that are done before this video. So this is going to be the 6th part. A lot of people have given me a good feedback about this series because it's totally practical based. We're creating a full application from scratch to, complete product, and we will see how we can deploy that to the Google Play Store and the App Store as well. So before we start with the tutorial, I'm going to show you the current state of the application. Also, I would like to show you my GitHub account, in which you can download the source code of this project. Here's a link for a YouTube playlist. Also, here's the source code. It's free, open source. You can do whatever you like. It's going to be the complete project open source. Anybody want to contribute, you're more than welcome to do that. Okay, so application is running on localhost 4200, and here is the current state of our application. So right now we got this one expense, and I want to show you the application section of the developer tools, and here we should have a storage for this. So I'm going to clear out the storage, and let's refresh the page. Okay, so that's the current stage of our application. I'm going to click on this plus button, and it's going to open up this model, and I can type it in any amount, type a description, select support, click on add, and then if I refresh now, you'll see then the expense has been added. Now, there are things that are missing. We need to work on that. How do we actually update our data once we add it? So yeah, this is the current state. So this is the expense tracker application, in which we will create an expense tracker where a user can add expense, delete it, monitor it, and later on we will have some analytics going on, a login registration stuff happening as well. I'd be wondering why the UI looks different if you are following the 5th part of this tutorial series. Well, that's because the iPhone has a different UI than Android. So if I switch to Pixel and refresh this application, you see the different UI now, and that's what we've been using so far. To start the video, I would like to request you to consider donating. It's gonna help me to keep putting out this kind of content. These videos takes lots of time, and I want to put out more contents. So if you think this tutorial series helped you, then consider donating. There's a link for a PayPal in the description of this video. I've got one announcement to make. If you need any kind of programming work done, web development, hybrid mobile application development, and native development of iOS or Android, Python work, server-side programming, or web scraping, if you required any kind of work related to these, let me know. You can shoot me an email or contact me through Twitter or LinkedIn, and we can work together. I will love to work with you if you have any project I could be part of. And yeah, if you need any kind of help, just shoot me an email and we can talk about it. Okay, let's get started with the 6th part of our IONIC workshop, creating expense tracker using IONIC and capacitor. So first thing, let's take a look at our applications. Here is our application, and I'm gonna go open up a Trello, and also I'm gonna open Adobe XD. We're using Adobe XD for prototyping, and we are using Trello to plan our work. So here we got this expense logger. Well, the name is basically expense tracker, but sometimes you hear me expense logger, or sometimes you hear me expense tracker. So it's pretty much the same thing. Now here we've got amount, a description, date and time, type, and then these 2 buttons here. It's just like a placeholder. Let's go verify a few things in our application. So we're gonna do a bit of testing here. I'm gonna click on this plus button. It should open up the model. I'm gonna type a value, let's just say 50. I'm gonna say this is the test expense, and I'm going to select games as that. Click on add, and here we got the error saying cannot read property of push of null. So it does really make sense if you take a look at this error. So basically that this expenses is not even initialized at that stage. So for that, what we need to do is go to our code, go to dashboard, page. I'm gonna try to initialize this expenses when this component get initialized. So for that, I'm gonna get rid of our initializer there, and I'm gonna come here, and here we're gonna use another if statement. I would say if this dot expenses, we can say this dot equal to initialize it. Okay, now I'm going to go and add a negate here. Let's save the file, and now let's take a look at what happens. Now I'm gonna go and click on this plus button, and I'm gonna add an expense. Let's add a description there, and I'm gonna use this add button, and there you go, we got that expense there. We're gonna go and add a second one. Let's click on add, and it's adding now. So we resolved that problem. We can just check for that if that is not initialized, then can you go and initialize it? That's fine. And I'm gonna go refresh the page as well, and I want to make sure that this gets loaded as well. So here is a constructor function, so when this gets constructed, it's gonna go and grab that expenses from our local storage and add that to the expenses. So yeah, that's pretty good. Now we got that expenses adding. Now we're going to define an agenda for this video. We're going to go and open Trello and start adding some tasks. I'm going to open Trello, and we got this board there, expense logger. Actually, the application name is changed, so I'm going to change this to expense tracker. Okay. Now these are the things we are developed, and we're going to create another task for us. So this task would be something that we want to store a date with its own expenses. So let's just say in our application, we want to click on this date, and it should come up with something, a date picker. And from that, I want to go back in the previous days, and I want to add some expense onto that date. And then here, this would basically will be able to, filter our expenses depending on the date. Let's just say you want to check an expense from last month, a date, blah. Then you can click on this and select the date, and it should actually update our data right here. Okay, so let's do that next. So I'm going to create a task here. Store. So let's just bring it up. Let's make it a little bit bigger. So store expenses according to date. Okay, and for that, what we'll need to do is create a date picker and select date from date picker, store new expense depending on selected date. And then we are going to show the newly created expense in the dashboard page. Okay, and what else we can do here? We need to create a function which will return us expenses depending on a selected date. And that could be a different task. For now, we'll just leave that here. I'm going to move this saying ready for development. I'm going to move this here. So let's just say it's in progress. Let's go back to our application. We're going to go to this application in the developer tools. Let's clear out the data, refresh the app, and we don't see any more data here. First, let's work on a date picker. So let's just go to IONIC documentation. And within IONIC documentation, we should have something called a date picker. So I'm going to search for date picker. So that's date and time. If I click on this, it's going to open up a date picker like that. So let's go to an example, and we can just copy paste that code. So here we got this date picker with the format there. What I'm more interested in is just a date and a month. So we can select this one. So I'm going to copy this bit, go back to our code, and we're going to go to dashboard HTML. So let's go to dashboard. And here we have a date picker. So that's what we have here. and I would like to bring up the date picker when I click on this. So let's just leave that here. I'm gonna paste that code here, and label should be date for this. So let's select date. I'm gonna just comment this out for now, and let's see how the UI is looking. So here we got a date that's come up. That's really good. So you see that how easy it is. I have to fix a UI. So right now we got this category, amount, and today they're in like text. I want to convert them into buttons. And there's another problem here. You see that line there in our application. I'm gonna just zoom in a bit, and here we got the line, slight line under the date object, or date button actually. So let's go back to 100%, and we'll like to remove those lines. So I'm gonna go to Ion items, I'm gonna type lines, I'm gonna set that property to none, and we don't see line anymore. That's good. And then also I'm gonna change this label to button. And now we should have that kind of like a button there. Position, I would like to just leave that without position. So yep, that's good. I can click on it and it's actually bringing the date up. So that's really good. Okay, we might want to change other buttons like that as well. So we'll worry about them later, but for now just worry about this date. I'm going to get rid of this button, and here when we have a button there, I would like to actually have a color set to primary, so we're not really missing out. You know, the button property stays primary no matter what happens, even if we get rid of that here as well. So we got that button there, we got date picker coming up. Now we're going to work on display format, minimum, and max value. Set the max value to today's date. So I'm gonna go to date and time service, and here we got a function which returns this current date and time to a date. So it's returning a date object, so that's what we need. So I'm going to go to dashboard page, and I'm going to inject this date and time service into dashboard page. So here we got the date and time service injecting into our constructor of the dashboard component. That's good. So we go to dashboard component, and I'm going to use that date and time service. And here I will use this dot date and time service dot get current date. Okay, and I'm gonna save this file, and for the min we can just use 2020, okay, as a year. And I'm gonna get rid of the display format for now. Okay, it should use a default one. So let's save the file and let's take a look at, click on that, and it's saying cannot read property of year of undefined. Okay, so it's saying that this is actually undefined. It's not grabbing the today's date. So for that, what we can do here, I can create a new variable for now. Let's just say today date, and that would be a date object. And in the constructor function, we can say this dot today date equal to this dot date and time service dot get current date. Okay, you could create a date object right here, because I mean it's not a problem, but the only reason why I'm grabbing the current date from date and service because to keep the code consistent. Okay, now we can use this today's date instead of directly using date and time service. So I'll use today's date. Let's save the file and let's see what we have. I'm going to click on this date. Still there's a problem. So I'm going to use this today's date.toISO string, and now let's see. Click on that, and there we go. It actually required that ISO. So here we got 2020 as a minimum. We can go back to January, February, and March. Now, one functionality that I would like for users to have is that they should not be able to go into the previous date, then they've installed the application. So when they install the application first time, they should have some sort of date getting stored into local storage. I'm going to store a date when the user install application for the first time. So it depends. Maybe you have a different opinion of storing that date in app component or, somewhere else, maybe in a storage service. For me, I'm gonna go to constant folder and create a file here, and I'm going to create a TypeScript file. I'll name it constants.ts and add to the Git repository. To create an enum here, we're gonna export that as well. Use enum, and I'm going to name it storage keys. Within the enum, I'm going to create, let's just say, install date. The reason why I created this enum is there may be places in our application down the road we want to store a few things depending on particular key. So instead of writing this string as a key, we should create an enum and use from there. So this way you can, avoid having a typo errors. So here we got the storage keys and install a date. Now we're gonna store and install date to our local storage. I'm gonna go to app component, and here when the app is initializing for the first time, I'm going to actually use a data service somewhere and then set our install date in our data service. So first of all, let's go to data service. And here we're creating this expense. I'm going to copy paste this bit, and I'm going to change this to install date. And I'm going to get rid of this underscore because it's not observable, and it's just going to be a string. Okay, let's just set that as a date object. And this is a read-only and it's private. I'm going to generate getters and setters for this. So right click on this and click on generate. And I'm going to use getters and setters. And it says no field without getters have been found. So it's got data setters, not exactly. We're going to get rid of this read only because it won't do getters and setters for that. So click OK. And now we got the getters and setters for this stage. So I'm just going to bring them at the bottom there. Okay, so now we can get that and we can set that as well, right? So now we are going to use this this install that storage key and store a new date into local storage. So for that, I'm gonna go to app component, and in our initialize function here, when this gets constructed, I'm going to inject a data service there as well. So I'm going to put private data service. Okay, and now after this initialize function, I'm going to create another function. I'm going to say initialize install date, and that can return nothing. And first of all, we're going to need a storage service. So I'll use private storage service. So we could use some function from a storage service. I'm going to say this dot storage service dot get from local storage, and we're going to use this storage keys dot install date. And once we grab that, we are going to say a value, whatever the value is there. We're going to use if statement within this. So also if there's a value, then this dot, we can say data service dot install date equal to a value. If that's not the case, then we can use if else statement. We can say this dot storage service save to local. And now we're going to use storage keys.install date. And now here we actually created in one of the video that we're going to use this as, you know, type of expense storage, but this is like a last step to store data into local storage that should not be strongly typed. So I'm going to change this to any. Let's go back to app component, and here we can add a new date. Okay, now we're going to make our initialize app an async function. So I'm going to use the async, and we are going to do a return await, and the return should be promise. Type would be void. Okay, now here we can call this when things goes well in initialize process. I can call this does initialize install date. All right, and that should be it. Now we are going to set some variables in our dashboard page. So here we got today's date. I'm going to use install date there as well. That would be type of date. And here we can use this dot data service dot, actually this dot install date equal to this dot data service dot install date. Okay, and in our component here I can use this install date as a value. And let's take a look at our application. So I'm going to click on this date. It says cannot read the year, so this is what the problem is. I click on date, and here we got the minimum date set up. A few modifications that I would like to do with today date right now. First of all, we're going to go to storage service, not actually storage service, data service, and I'm going to cut this bit. Okay. And I'm going to paste that in date and time service because that's not a data. Okay, and then in a date service we're going to go grab this bit. I'm going to move this to our date and time service there. Okay, and also I'm going to create private underscore today date. That would be type of date as well. I'm going to need a getters and setter for that as well, so I'm going to use Python auto getters and setters, and I'm going to cut this bit and paste it here. Okay, we go to app component, and here it's saying data service not there. That's fine because we don't need a data service right here. So I'm going to get rid of this bit, and then here instead of data service we're going to use data and time service. First, let's import it. Okay, and here, if there is a value, we can say this dot a date and time service dot install date equal to a value. If that's not the case, then we're going to store that value as a new date. And it's returning a promise. It's been basically, we can't really, you know, use anything there, so we're just going to ignore that. So here it says install date does not exist in type of date the service. That's fine, and the error is coming from dashboard component. We'll fix that. So here we got date and time service is actually setting up this. So everything is all good in our app component. Now let's go to the dashboard component. Here we got install date and today's date. I'm going to get rid of this bit, and I'm going to use this dot date and time service dot today's date. Okay, and here we are going to use this dot install, this dot date and time service dot install date. Okay, that should be. Let's check out our application now. I'm going to click on this date, and here we got this, you know, there's an error still. There are a lot of errors, so let's try a few things in our dashboard. So here I'm going to get rid of to ISO for now. And here it's still saying data service property installed it does not exist on type. So the error is coming on a data service itself. So if I go to data service, And here we got this constructor function. I'm gonna get rid of this bit, and here we don't see any error anymore. So I'm gonna click on date. Here we got this 2020, okay, and I can go to, for example, December, up till December, but you can see that our minimum date is getting set, so that's good enough component. And here we initialize the date and time service. Instead of using this new date constructor, I'm going to use this dot date and time service dot get current date and time. That should be it. Now if I refresh the page, let's click on this date. Okay, it's not coming up, something's wrong. So let's see what's wrong. I'm going to click on date, and here we're getting a promise read of undefined. And here when we have an install date, we're going to say this dot date and time service. Actually not an if, but you know, just use this dot date and time service dot in today's date equal to, we can say this dot date and time service dot get current date. Okay, now we should have initialization done properly. If I click on the date, still a problem. It says cannot read a property of year of undefined. We go to dashboard component, and here we're using this dot date and service dot install date. I'm gonna uncomment this. Actually, just do this bit. I'm going to create a new date right here so we can verify if there's a problem in our initialization or something's wrong. So I'm going to use today's date like that. Click on this date, cannot read it. Okay, if I go to today's date, I'm going to convert this to ISO string. Let's click on date, and now it's working. So install date and today's date is fine. Now if I go to dashboard page, and I can say this dot date and service dot today date, and I'm actually going to log this onto a console and see what's going on. So we got today date and console.log this dot install date. Save the file and let's take a look at console. So here we're getting this first one is today's date, which is actually returning this bit. Okay, and we're getting this second one, install date, which is returning this bit. Okay, so what's going on? What is the difference between why it's logging differently? If we take a look at our application here, we are storing that from a moment, I guess. So there is a difference in formatting. So we need to figure out what is the difference between that. For now, if I go to dashboard page and I add this to ISO string, which converts this today's date to ISO string, and our application, which we're returning this, but still working because we converted that to this bit. Okay, so that solves the problem for now, but later we'll have to come and fix this problem later on. User to have a functionality of storing expensive to a previous date. To test that, we are going to set our min to 2020 for now. Okay, and we'll come back and fix this, but we got the functionality for a min of install date, so that's all good now. So if I go back to our application, refresh the page, click on this, and I can go back to the previous dates as well. Now let's add an event for a date so we could check what the selected date when the user selects it, and click on done. Let's go back to the code, and I'm gonna hide the terminal. In here, first of all, let's just do a bit of zoom in. So now I'm going to add an ion event here. So let's just bring it down so we have some, better readability. And here I would like to first of all use a hash, and we'll just say selected date. Then we are going to use ion change event, and here we are going to call a function once we have that date changed. Name our function saying change selected date, and we are going to pass in selected date dot value. Okay, and I'm going to copy this bit, go to dashboard page for TypeScript file, and I'm going to create a function here. So we can say paste, and that's not going to return anything. We just set that type to void. We can say this dot selected date equal to the value that we are getting. So we're going to get the value. I'm going to set that to value. We can check the type of the value by typing console.log, and I can use type of value and it will log that value. Okay, so we go back to HTML file, and here we got the function, arrow's gone. Now let's try it out. Okay, so actually we're gonna go and log the value coming in as well. So let's do a console.log and do a value. Let's save the file and let's refresh the page. Go to console. And now if I go and change that to 7th March, click on done, we get the type is a string and it's coming as this. Okay, that's really good. So what we need to do is we need to update that date. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to say this is going to be a string, and I'm going to use this string and create that date from there. So we go to date and time service, and here I'm going to create a function, create date from string, and that would take as date in string, and then it will return a date object. And I'm gonna say moment, we can pass in that string and we can say to date. Let's copy this bit, and then what we get that value, we're gonna call this dot date and time service dot create from this value, and that should solve the problem. Now when I go back to application, I can see if I change the date to 7, click on done, and now the type is string, but we're getting this as value. So I think it hasn't been updated. It should not have a type of string. Oh, my bad. So we are not actually typing selected date. So we're going to use this dot selected date type, and then this dot selected date. Okay, now we should get that properly. Click on done, click on, let's just say 6, done. We got this in an object, and this is our type of date. So that's good now. Let's just get rid of this bit, and we are setting the selected date as a date. So that's good. Let's just get rid of these 2 logs as well. We don't need them anymore. Now let's show that date right here. Okay, for current selected date, I'm going to go to dashboard HTML file. And here we are going to use a value, and we can set that to today's date. So let's show the selected date a value right here. So I'm going to use selected date dot value. Let's save the file and let's see what we have here. Now we're getting this value. It's basically, it's going, it's not enough space to put that here. So for that, we are going to use a pipe symbol and then the date. It will format that date for us. So here we got March. Now because I'm using this iPhone and that's not enough space for me, so what I'm going to do here, move this somewhere else. So we don't want to show this to the title. So I can use this ion subheader and use that bit there. So let's get rid of it here and let's save the file, and now let's see if we get the date there. Okay, so we got the date, we got the total now. Let's go back to the code, and I'm going to change this ion title to ion card title. And now I'm going to save the file and let's see what we have. So we got the bigger title now, and now we got the date at the bottom. That's looking good now. And yeah, I'm gonna change this to default title, and we got this date, and we got the total right there. Now this space is a little bit like, we might want to show some buttons later on, but for now it's fine. Now this is how our application is looking in iPhone, and it's looking at Android phone. Okay, so now we got some weird UI thing to fix when it comes to iPhone. As you can see, the date button is a little bit up. Go back to the code and few fixes that we would like to do right now. If I go to the dash component, here you see the variable name or property name of this dashboard component is selected date. And in HTML, we're using this and then same name selected. I want to change this to just selected, and we're going to change this to selected as well. Now here we want to read the value of a current selected date from this property, not from here. So I'm going to get rid of this and just use selected date, and let's save the file. And let's take a look at, we're expecting this to have the value there. Okay, nothing is there. We want to change this to today. So we're going to use this function and initialize that as well. So here we got this change selected date and today's date. Now we are going to use this today's date as selected date as well. So when we create a constructor of this, we're going to use this dot selected date equal to today's date. So use this dot today date. Okay, now let's take a look at that now. Okay, we got 8 March. Now if I go and change this date to 7, we change that to 7. So that's working now. That's good. Now we maybe want to create a function where we want to filter out, or maybe we can go to, select some weird date from here. And I want to go back to today's date with one click. I can click on this today, and that should change this to today's date. So we can do that as well. I'm going to create a function, set current to today date, and that's returning nothing. And we can set this dot selected date equal to, actually this dot today date equal to this dot date and time service dot get current date, and this dot selected date equal to this dot date and time service get current date. Okay, and that should solve the problem. And I'm going to go to dashboard page. We're going to find where is our today. Let's just zoom out a bit. So our today button, I'm going to call that function. So let's say set current to today's date. All right, let's try it out. If I go and select some other month or other date, click on today, and that will set this back to today's date. That's good enough. So now the problem that you're seeing here, the scroll, that's basically a problem with the IONIC framework datetime picker. I'm going to show you this GitHub bug. So it says bug IONIC picker ignored, attempt to cancel. So the same bug is there. So in the future, you won't see this. So if I change this to, for example, iPhone, actually not iPhone, but Pixel 2, and save that file, refresh it, click on date, and now if I move this, it won't pass that error. It's not an error. Okay, that's a bug in the IONIC framework. So I'm going to change some stuff here as well. So value is set to today's date. We don't need that anymore, so I'm going to just get rid of that. Okay, that's all good now. So our today's date is working, our date picker is working. Now let's try saving an object of expense according to the selected date. Let's click on this plus button, and I'm going to change some amount, add a description, select something, and here we got this date, 8 March 2020. Okay, we're going to take a look at this application, and here we have this 038, and that's when we're storing this expense. Okay, back to the code, and now I would like to save an expense depending on a selected date. So here we got this selected date set to create date from string, and that's basically sitting here. I would like to move this selected date to a date and time service. So here I'm going to create another variable, and I'm going to say selected date. And here we're going to create a getters and setters for that. So we'll use Python getters and setters function. And here we got getters and setters for that. So I'm just going to cut them and paste them here. Okay. Now we go to dashboard page, and here I'm going to use this selected date to whatever the date is there. So this dot date and time service dot selected date. Okay. And down here, we're using this change selected date to this. Instead of that, I'm going to actually change this selected date. So this dot date and time service dot selected date equal to value. And I'm going to go to function, and here we're getting a date, and that's not a date actually. So what we need to do is create a new date from it. So I'm going to use this dot date and time service dot get actually create date and time from a string, and that would be a value, and that should fix the problem. So here we got change selected date, and then we're using this dot date and time selected date dot set date this. Okay, that should be fine. And also we're going to keep that this dot selected date equal to, and then the same thing there. We can come back and improve this code. It requires improvement. Yep, I get it, but for now let's make it work. So we got this selected date coming in from date and time service. Let's test our application. I'm going to refresh, and here we have no date now. I'm going to click on date and try to change the date, and we get the date there. Okay, but once this gets initialized, I'm going to go to dashboard component, move it here, and here we have this date, which is set to select date, and on initializing of this, it's not there. So I'm going to go to this page, and I'll say this dot selected date equal to this dot date and time service dot current date and time. And I'm going to get rid of this bit from here. Let's save this. And now let's refresh our page. Now we're getting that today's date. So it's looking good now. Now in terms of adding an expense. So here is our function add expense.ts. This is the function that initialize create expense. Now we're getting a value from expense, and then we can set that to create it on this dot current date. Now, instead of this, I'm going to change this to this dot date and time service dot selected date. Okay, and now we have that date. Then we call this action service create expense, and we pass in an expense. Now let's go to that function, and here we are using this expense as expense interface, and we're using this dot storage service save expense to local. Now here we're using save expense to local. Let's go into that function, and this is where we need to modify a few things. So within our expense, we are getting the creation date. Okay, so I'm going to use this key, and I'm going to say this dot date and time service dot get date and time ISO, and we can pass in expense dot created on. And I'm going to console.log, and we can just log the key there. And I can do a debug there as well. Let's just see. Now let's go here, and I'm going to go to application folder, no folder actually in the developers, and I'm going to get rid of this bit and refresh the application. And I'm going to click on plus, add an expense, select any category, click on add, and our debugger should trigger in. Now here a key is set to 03082020. That's good. So let's let it go, and we have that expense there. I'm going to go and change the date to, let's just say 7. Click on done. Now we have our selected date, this to 7. Click on this add. I'm going to add an expense. Let's add again. Click on add. And now here we got this 03/07/2020 again, which is not what we wanted. So what we need to do here is we need to be able to pass in that selected date when we create an expense. So we create an expense and the date is coming in as 07 March 2020. Okay, so we go back to the code and here in add expense. Now we can say what is the selected date. I'm going to do a debugger here. And I'm going to do a console.log. And we can do an expense dot created on. And we just let it go. Okay, so let's go to the console. And I'm going to go to applications and let's just get rid of it. This bit. Let's refresh. And I'm going to click on add expense. Add. There's a debugger. And then we have a date which is undefined. I'm going to let it go. And here we got the date 03/08. And we got this expense adding to this date. If I go to this, click on done, add an expense. Click on add. And now the date should be 07. Okay, so things are working. Let's add it. Now we go to application. We have 2 expenses. So one expense is here dining out. Okay, and then we got this 07, which is here. So that's a maintenance. Now this thing does not have a created, like the created date there. That could be a problem. So why is that? Let's go back to our function. I'm going to get rid of this bit. We go to action service. And here we're getting an expense. I'm going to do a debugger here. Let's add an expense. Click on add. And here we're getting an expense. And created on is undefined. Okay, that's the issue here. So we go to this function and find out who's calling this function. If I go to add expense, and here we have this expense service value, and then we got this created on, which is basically undefined when we start with, and that's what it gets called. So for that, we need to make sure that we get that selected date. Now initially it will be undefined. So what we need to do here is if expense dot created on, okay, if that is undefined, so I'm gonna do negate, then what we need to do is expense dot created on. We can set that this dot date and time servers dot get current date and time. Okay, and that should solve the problem for now, but there is a room for improvement. I'm gonna go to application and get rid of the data. Let's refresh the page. Let's add an expense. So I'm gonna click on plus and then click on add. There's a debugger. And now we're getting this, the Sunday 08. Let's click on this. And then same thing that we're getting there. Okay, so we got this expense right here with this date. I'm going to go and change the date to 7. And I'm going to add another expense. Click on furniture, add. Now we got this date set to 7. And I'm going to let it go. And then also the key is set to 0307. Let's click on go. And here we got this expense as, March 07, 2020. And then we select the date is this one. If I click on today, that becomes this date. And then if I go and add an expense again and change this to mortgage, add, let's check out. So the date is still 7. That's the problem there. So let's go here, and then you see that's a 7. The date didn't actually update it. Now we'll leave that for now. The video is almost very long, so in the next video we are going to fix this problem, and also we are going to work on filtering this dashboard array of expense. We are going to filter that through date. So that will be in the next video. Thanks for watching. Talk to you guys in the next one.